Hi, I'm Jamie Belinne. I'm the Assistant Dean for Career Services at the Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. I'm also one of the founders of MBA CSCA, so I'm going to take you way back in time. I want you to imagine it is several decades ago, back at a time before we had standards. And back in those days, things would happen like your dean would come running into your office and say, "How come this little school you've never heard of has a 100% placement rate and we don't?" Or things like, information be published about your school and you would look at your salary and your placement rate and think, gee, where'd that come from? Or somebody would have a salary listed for their school and you'd call the school and say, "Why are your salaries so high?" And they'd say, I don't know. Why do you think they're so high? I mean, basically the numbers were meaningless. And as we dug deeper, we found things were happening like schools that only collected data on those students who happened to wander into their office to tell them that they had a job and not on anyone else. So they would report on about 35% of their students, all who happened to have jobs, so 100% of the 35% were placed, aka 100% placement rate. So basically the numbers were meaningless. And we all reported because we sliced and diced different ways. And so our regions were different, our industries were different, our functions were different. There was really no way for a prospective student or anyone to look at schools side by side and understand what was going on. And so we came together long ago in the mid-90s and said, we need to do something about this. And if we don't take control of this data, then the media is going to take control of the data for us, and they're going to decide what makes sense instead of us deciding what makes sense. And we needed to be in charge of that process. So we got everybody to the table. We had ranked schools, unranked schools, big schools, small schools, public, private, everybody. And we spent at least a year fighting really hard. Because what we realized was there was no one way to report data that was best for everyone. And we had to slowly but surely, and very painfully sometimes, reach consensus over what makes the most sense for the most people. Because we decided the most important thing was consistency and transparency. Even if we didn't always get our way, at least when we looked at a number from one school, we understood what it meant relative to other schools. And that's what it was really about, consistency and transparency. And over time, we rolled out the standards, and then we slowly but surely got everybody else on board. So no longer was the media telling us, you have to do it this way, but we were saying, no, we've all decided to do it this way. And if you ask this other question, we are all going to agree not to answer it because that question's really not relevant or meaningful. And we also were able to go back to our deans and say, no, we have to be honest with what we're doing. Because I'll tell you what, for those of you that are thinking it may be easier to lie, you got to live with that lie. Once a dean has said you have 100% placement at ridiculously high salary, I promise you the next class comes in and says, call me when I have my job at the ridiculously high salary, because clearly you do that for everyone. It's not how we wanted things to be. So we took charge of the system again. And because there's no easy way to do this, and because the world keeps changing, we put together a committee that was diverse and representative of all the different types of schools that are out there so that we could consistently look at the standards and evaluate them and update them as needed. And the process continues to be painful, and there's a lot of arguing and disagreement, and that's healthy. And we continue to evolve over time, which is also healthy. And so those of you that are going to be working with the standards, I encourage you to recognize it's not always about your school. It is about the profession and the industry and doing what's right. And most importantly, being consistent and transparent so everybody understands what they're looking at when they're looking at outcomes from any university anywhere.